from Seattle, John Magnuson, who is an engineer. John, are you there? John Magnuson, who is with the company that actually built the World Trade Center towers. John, have you heard our two layman explanations tonight of what it was we think collapsed the building, and do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I need to say one thing. At the time of the design of the World Trade Center, that was in the mid-1960s, and I was in 6th grade. So to kind of put in perspective how much time has passed since this design was actually completed. But the description of the fact that steel, when it gets up to 1,500, 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, that it loses its strength is accurate. The buildings actually survived the impact of both the planes, and it was really the fire that finally created the disaster.
And the upper floor fell on the next floor down, which fell on the next floor, and the sheer accumulation of weight just forced the whole building to collapse on itself.
Right there, from the videotape, and I can only go from what I've seen on television, but the videotape showed that several of the upper floors fell onto the next lower floor that was still intact. And once that happens, there's going to be an instant overload situation, and then it will fail. And then that will drop down to the next floor into another instant overload situation. And so the floors just progressively collapsed down all the way to the bottom.
I appreciate very much the fact that you were very young in the mid-1960s when the trade towers were built. Though I have heard it said earlier today that they in fact, were stronger, more sensible structures than many of the more daring-shaped buildings that are being built in parts of the world today.
Right. The term that structural engineers use is redundancy. And the World Trade Center towers really set a new standard in redundancy. And that's why those airplanes were able to crash into the towers without causing the structural failure. The buildings were still standing. And then the problem was the fire and the jet fuel. And in normal buildings, all the steel is protected with fireproofing, and there's sprinkler systems, but they're not designed to protect against a jet fuel fire inside of a building.
Can you be a little more precise what you mean by redundancy?
Redundancy is that if you have a structural element that is damaged and is no longer able to carry the load, that load is able to be passed on to other elements or other columns or other beams within the building. And the columns on the World Trade Center, they were spaced at 39 inches on center all the way across each face.
What does that mean, 39 inches at center?
Every 3 feet 3 inches there was a column that supported the building. So they were very closely spaced together. Many buildings, the columns are 10 or 15 feet apart or more. And so having these very close spaced columns on the outside created a lot of redundancy. That's why there was able to be a hole in the side. If you go back and look at the tapes, there was a tremendous hole in the side of the building, and it didn't collapse until the fire brought it down.
And Trade Tower number 7, which was the last to go, which was a building 47 stories high, do you have any sense of why it ultimately collapsed? Was it the concussion of the other buildings collapsing which undermined it?
I'm not familiar with that building. We were not involved in that building, and I haven't seen any of the details on that yet.
So aside from your horror, which I assume you share with the rest of us today, when you look at what has happened today, do you learn something?
Well, it's a very difficult situation because if you take that much of a load and that much jet fuel and you put it into a building, there's very little that you can do. And really, I think the solution to this will be to keep the planes and keep these attacks away from the doorsteps of these buildings.
John Nance, who's our aviation analyst, said to us several hours ago when speculating, as we all are in many cases, about who may have been involved, said he would not be surprised if somewhere in the world there was a structural engineer who was part of this operation. Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense. I sure would hope not. Every structural engineer is dedicated to preserving public safety. And just the thought that someone would take that training and use it for evil purposes just really disgusts me.
Is there anything I've missed, John? No. That? No? Okay. I'm very grateful for the time. Okay. What's it like up there in Seattle tonight? People feeling exactly the same thing people here in New York City are feeling?
Yes, and there was certainly a lot of apprehension during the day. Many of the buildings were evacuated just as precautionary measures. But there's this same empty feeling in your stomach about the whole thing, and just watching. People, of course, were glued to the coverage on the television sets.
Well, thank you for being so articulate about it and helping us understand, at least from the, thank you very much, from the slightly cold-blooded language of engineers and journalists covering this from some distance today, the structure of the building, which may not have been able to stand up to that fire, which was caused when those two planes, the first and the second, struck under somebody's control fairly high up in these superstructures, and then simply, as Robert Krulwich pointed out, and John Magnuson confirms, collapsed down upon themselves. And it was the president, we think, George Stephanopoulos is still with me. You were down there all today. It was the president, we think, who gave some clue to that which we have feared most of the day, that it wasn't hundreds of people involved in this, but thousands.
But thousands, yes. But Peter, I think, and I was thinking of this as John Magnuson was talking, when you talk about the strength of the building, in the coming days, we're also going to be hearing about some amazing not only rescue stories, but survival stories. I spoke with the relative of someone who was on the 102nd floor of the first building today. After it took the hit from the airplane, that person still made it down from the 102nd floor and is home safe tonight.
It's very interesting because one of the lawyers had come down from a lower floor, believed that many people had got down in a fairly orderly fashion from some of the highest floors, at certainly right underneath where the attack had occurred, which has given people here, and I suspect in the country, some hope tonight that many more people get out of this building than we thought. It is now 9 o'clock Eastern Time. In the East, it is now 6 o'clock. On the West Coast, up and down the West Coast in the United States, it is about 12 hours, just 12 hours and a bit since many of us walking to work were suddenly confronted with having to deal with this in one way or another, and there's a huge number of developments to
inside the building. Then a few minutes later, just after 9 a.m., as smoke pours from the top of the North Tower, an unbelievable sight, a second plane hitting the South Tower.
Oh my God! Oh, shit! Oh my God!
There are gaping holes in flames coming now from both towers. Witnesses see people screaming from the higher floors.
They're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
I see people jumping from the top of the World Trade Center. And,
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the fire.
It was about 10 o'clock a.m. when the South Tower collapsed.
A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
On the ground, there's chaos. Flaming debris, someone said, like the dark side of the moon.
It was bad. It was like a dust storm or something. Like I couldn't see anything.
About 20 minutes later, the second tower crumbles to the ground.
Oh my God, there it goes!
Symbols of New York, the World Trade Center towers, are simply gone.
Diane Sawyer giving us what it was like, at least from a distance, because we've all been at a distance from this, what it was like in those first moments. Now let's look at it from another perspective, because ABC's Lisa Stark, who covers aviation for us, as we've said several times today, is able, I think, to take you there, Lisa?
I am, Peter.
Lisa's in Seattle today, where she's been out at the Boeing company. It was Boeing jets, Boeing equipment, 757s and 767s involved. Why don't you just walk us through what you and we now know about how this unfolded from the point of view of the hijackers?
All right, I will, but Peter, I want to give you a little bit of new information first, if I may. There's a meeting going on, we understand, between the Federal Aviation Administration and the major carriers at this point. They are trying to determine how they might be able to get air service back up and going again tomorrow, what steps would need to be taken. We do understand from a number of sources that one of the things they are considering is a resumption of the Air Marshal program. That would be armed air marshals that would actually fly on a number of flights. Now, that happens now in the United States, but it's a very small percentage of flights. It's unclear whether they would ramp up to every flight. That seems unlikely, but whether they are considering whether they would put air marshals on a number of flights as a precaution throughout the United States. One of the options that they are talking about.
Okay, just before you go to your chronology then, let me remind people that what you mean by air service backup is because hundreds of airplanes and thousands of passengers, an extraordinary job of air traffic control and pilots getting planes safely on the ground when the FAA decided everybody should land at the nearest possible airport, many of which are in Canada. And so there are thousands of people stranded far away from home tonight, safe, but when you refer to air service being got back up again, you basically mean getting the nation's air communication systems back up and running.
Absolutely. There's a national ground stop throughout the United States until at least noon tomorrow. It's going to be a massive task to get the system up and running, and obviously the main concern is to do it safely, to make sure that we don't have a repeat of the horrible events that we saw today. So there are security issues that are paramount, and there are also simply operational issues. How do you sort of turn the switch back on and get as many as 40,000 flights every day in the United States back in the air? And those discussions about that are underway right now, we understand.
We'll all follow that one. Now take us, if you would, through the movement of the aircraft which were ultimately and fatally involved.
What we know is that American Airlines Flight 11 was the first plane involved. That was the plane, a 767, en route from Boston's Logan Airport to Los Angeles. The plane took off shortly after 8 o'clock, we understand. About a half hour into the flight, it made a sharp left turn down towards New York. There were massive changes in airspeed apparently at that time. As the plane then headed toward Manhattan, it slowed and slammed into the World Trade Tower. It had been in the air about 45 minutes. Now, at the same time this was going on, there was a United Airlines 767, Flight 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles. It also was in the air, taken over by hijackers. That plane made a turn towards New Jersey, then made virtually a U-turn and came up toward the Trade Tower from the south, came over Staten Island. It slammed into the second Trade Tower. It had also been in the air about 45 minutes. Now, before any of these planes actually hit the World Trade Center, a third plane, a United Airlines 757, American Airlines American Airlines 757. It was Flight 77 from Dulles, had taken off. It was bound for Los Angeles as well. We don't know much about the flight path of that plane. We believe it was in the air about 1 hour before it hit the Pentagon. Then we have the fourth plane, United Flight 93, another 757, en route from Newark to San Francisco. We are unclear about the departure time. We have some conflicting information about that, whether it was close to 8 o'clock or closer to 8:45. It did depart Newark Airport. It appears that hijackers may have taken control of the plane over Cleveland. That is when it suddenly made a turn back toward the east. We also understand that sometime at that point, someone from the cockpit called the FAA and requested a change in flight plan. They said, we're not going to San Francisco. We want to go to Washington, D.C., to DCA, which is National Airport. It's unclear whether there was another Washington target, perhaps, that this plane was aiming for. Either way, it didn't make it all the way to Washington. It crashed in Pennsylvania. A total of 266 passengers and crew on all four of these planes. The toll could have been even much, much worse on the jetliners because they were very lightly filled. They can hold anywhere from 185 to 250 people. The most crowded plane had 90 passengers and crew members on it. Peter, we also want to mention, if we can, that as this was unfolding, people on board these planes were able to communicate what was going on. We know some details about that. We know on Flight 11, that was the American Airlines flight, the first one that hit the World Trade Tower, a flight attendant was able to call the American Airlines Operations Center. The flight attendant informed them that a number of flight attendants had been stabbed and that the perpetrators had stormed the cockpit. She was also able to tell them, apparently, the seat number of at least one of the hijackers. She was able to give them that information. We also know that there were some cell phone calls from at least 2 of the other planes. There was a cell phone call, as you have reported earlier, from the plane that slammed into the Pentagon, a woman calling her husband, saying that these hijackers were on board, that they had box cutters, those sorts of knives, and they had herded all of the passengers into the back of the plane. And we understand there was also a cell phone call on the United 175 flight. That was the other flight that hit the World Trade Tower. Apparently, a son on that plane called his father from his cell phone and also said there were hijackers on board with knives. So we do know that as the events were unfolding, what was going on 30,000 feet above the United States was being communicated. Of course, unfortunately, there was nothing the people on the ground could do about any of this except watch in horror as these planes ended up where they ended up.
Well, thanks very much, Lisa Stark, who has given a very clear picture many times today on what precisely happened, or at least as much as we know of what happened. Thank you. On board those planes, we do not very often make recommendations for people's behavior from this chair, but as Lisa was talking, I checked in with my children, and who are deeply distressed, as I think young people are across the United States. And so if you're a parent, you got a kid in some other part of the country, call them up, exchange observations. People have been getting onto sites on the web, which is a very good, vigorous way for people, very good way for people to communicate. Some of the things people have been telling us at ABC News, at abcnews.com, after today, nothing changes. Sorry, everything changes. Nothing will ever be the same. The way you've lived your life, enjoyed your freedom, your very personal expression, it all changes after today. From someone else, only a month ago, I laid on a bench outside the World Trade Center and marveled at what man could create, looking up at those 110 stories, and now I stare in disbelief at what man can take away. I want retribution, said one person to abcnews.com, and that's a sentiment that has been widely, deeply expressed in the heart of the political establishment in Washington and by people in every walk of life across the country. And as George Stephanopoulos and Leon Panetta, the former White House Chief of Staff, have made very clear, and as the President clearly knows already, one of the things the President has to do is be patient and understand who it is who did this before the country can do anything by way of retaliation. Here's a slightly chilling one. If they can pull off an act like this, they are certainly capable of eventually sending nuclear weapons this way. And this is very interesting. How can people keep calling it the modern Pearl Harbor? At least we knew who we were up against back then. Of course, the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese was a surprise to a great many Americans in the middle of afternoon ball games. This is the first time today that Major League Baseball has ever canceled all its games since D-Day, the invasion of Normandy in World War II. And one of the enormously frustrating things for the intelligence establishment, for the political establishment, for all of us in the country today, not to mention anyone else in the world who was a friend of the United States, perhaps even a foe, is to understand who it was who actually did this. And the reverberations from this are indeed global. Air traffic, we already know, listening to Lisa Stark and our own reporting earlier today, is snarled around the world, especially in Europe. The impact of what happens there in terms of transportation and commerce. The stock exchange was closed today. It all has an effect somewhere else. Any place there is a proposed mass gathering, in many parts of the world, they are rethinking it. In Germany, they have now canceled the Frankfurt car show, which is one of the biggest car shows, if not the biggest car show in the world. There's some consideration to canceling the Oktoberfest, the great beer and culture festival in Munich in Germany. France has called a general security alert, and I'm just told that Ted Koppel is with us in London live. Ted has been in London and now can go even further than that, please, Ted, on telling us what's happened in Europe and as much as you know elsewhere.
Well, I must tell you, Peter, I've spent the better part of this day trying to get from where I was, which about 12 hours ago was in Italy, to where you are. And as you well know, and as you've been reporting for much of the day, getting into the United States from overseas is a very difficult task indeed. But it's just about, what time is it here? 2:15 in the morning here in London. And some of the early editions of the newspapers have come through, and I thought you might like to take a look at them. Let me hold them up. There's not a great deal that differentiates the tabloids today from the more serious newspapers. You can see it, Apocalypse, New York, September 11th, says the Daily Mail. Declaration of war, says the Daily Express. And then this one, which perhaps goes farther than it might, is this the end of the world, from the Daily Star? And so it goes. The Mirror, war on the world. The Sun, the day that changed the world. And now one of the more serious newspapers, the Independent, and again, the same horrific pictures that we have been seeing all day long. And the Independent says, Doomsday America, the times of London, when war came to America, and so it has gone. And I must tell you, Peter, the only thing I can tell you is, as you know, when we're overseas, American tourists tend to turn to folks like us, expecting that we know something. I'm afraid I knew less than they did. It was some other tourists who informed me earlier in the day of what had happened, and I went rushing back to my hotel room and packed while I was watching the television scenes that you have been reporting on all day. And all I can tell you is that this was a day when, as soon as people found out you were an American, they turned to you with expressions of grief, expressions of horror, expressions of outrage, and an offer to do anything they could do to help, which in my case meant getting a little bit closer to New York or Washington. Peter?
Ted, have you managed, I totally sympathize with what you've gone through today, and as bad as a day it is for many Americans, I understand what you mean when you say it's been a good day to be reminded that people around the world admire and sympathize with Americans, suffer with it. Can you give us some sense, if you have any whatsoever, just from looking at the reporting there, as to how governments are responding as well as individuals?
Well, again, Peter, and you've been in this situation often enough to be sympathetic to it. I literally just landed in London. We had to charter from Paris to get over here because flying into Heathrow wasn't that easy, especially at this time of night. And have only landed now and been reading the wires in the car coming in. And I do know that Tony Blair has expressed strong condemnation and, of course, a sense of oneness with the United States. Perhaps, Peter, the most interesting thing that I've heard, and just read a little bit of a transcript of a television newscast that came out of Tehran earlier this evening, is that the Iranian president, Khatami, is quoted by Iranian anchors earlier this evening as expressing his outrage and offering to help in any way that he can against this form of worldwide terrorism. Coming from Iran, that is quite remarkable, as I'm sure you know.
I do indeed, though perhaps a little more understandable coming from President Khatami, who is regarded as the president of Iran, who, as you well know, is trying to move the country closer to some kind of sense of democratic representation than others in the country are willing him to do. But I think we've all known for a long time that sometimes elements within the Iranian political establishment or on the edges of the political establishment operate in ways that other parts of the political establishment are not aware of. At any rate, I won't...
Right. But no, go ahead, Peter.
No, I was just going to say, I don't want to impose on you anymore, because I know you want to, I know, like anybody else arriving on scene, you want to sit down and get as much as you can. So please come back to us at any time that you want. You want to add something now?
Just one thing, and I realize compared to what everyone has been going through in the United States today, and especially the citizens of New York and Washington, this seems like a small thing, but I'm sure it was reflected today thousands, if not tens of thousands of times. Being overseas and picking up the phone, I've got 3 youngsters, as you know, who live in New York City. Just trying to get through on the phone today could be such a trial. And 2 of my youngsters, 3 of them actually, work down in downtown New York. And all I can tell you is you stop being a newsman real fast, and all you want to do is be a father and find out that the kids are all right and that everything is okay. And for so many, many people today, Americans around the world still wondering at this late hour what's happened to their loved ones. All I can tell you is the grief and the sympathy of the world goes out to all.
You're absolutely right, Ted. And as a man, as I just said just before we joined you, just got off the phone with at least one of his kids and the other is trying to call him. I totally appreciate it. We'll let you go to work. Please come back anytime, anytime that you feel like it with news from overseas. But as Ted indicates, when he holds up the tabloids, sometimes known as the popular newspapers and the more serious broadsheet newspapers in Britain, they all have those same headlines that this strike on America has somehow changed things. And it's not as if the United States, in the wake of Oklahoma City, was not aware that it could happen on the American mainland. But they use phrases like apocalypse now in the movie sense, among other things, and just make you realize how deeply this has felt and what impact it's had in other parts of the world. It's interesting that
youngsters were in the streets on the West Bank celebrating this attack on America, while Yasser Arafat was condemning it. Tell us, it's now late there, obviously, what the evening was like in the Middle East, Donna.
Well, Tom, people here in Israel and in the Palestinian territories were glued to their television sets through the course of this day, stunned by events, TV stations with wall-to-wall coverage. This is, sadly, a place that is accustomed to almost daily terror attacks, but nothing, of course, on the scale, the magnitude of what we saw today in the United States. Leaders from throughout the region, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi have condemned the attacks. Among the first to voice his horror was Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. However, as you said, there is a great deal of anti-American sentiment in this part of the world, and some of that was expressed here within hours of the attack.
They are helping the Jews to kill the Palestinian people.
First, how do you comment on the bombings in the United States?
We are completely shocked, completely shocked.
Somewhere else.
Osama bin Laden's homeland. Bin Laden, now prime suspect in the attacks, has called on his followers to fight until all Americans are driven out of Islamic countries. There's long been fear the conflict in Israel could drag neighboring Arab countries into a wider war. Now this attack may further embolden enemies of Israel.
The ambitions of terrorist groups that fight against Israel will rise.
The leader of Hamas, the Islamic extremist group responsible for many suicide bombings inside Israel, says he doesn't support attacks against innocent people, but says the U.S. must reassess its position. It's the cause of injustice in many parts of the world, he says. Tonight, Israel's prime minister calling for an international war on terrorism.
I believe that together we can defeat these forces of evil.
At the American embassy in Tel Aviv, flowers of sympathy.
I think very few Americans now don't understand how Israelis feel.
And Israeli airspace closed tonight, as are the borders with Lebanon, with Egypt, and with Jordan. All the checkpoints in and out of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are closed, as well as a precaution in case a terrorist tries to take advantage of the situation. Several U.S. embassies in the Middle East have been closed indefinitely in Yemen, in Kuwait, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Israel has also declared tomorrow a day of mourning in solidarity with the United States. And just one more note, Tom, Israel has sent rescue teams, experts in extricating people from rubble of buildings, to New York to assist in the search and recovery efforts. Tom?
Thank you very much. Donna Friesen, who is in Tel Aviv tonight with a wrap-up on what's going on in that troubled and volatile part of the world. It goes without saying that the terrorists were not just a ragtag group of people who acted in some kind of spontaneous or ad hoc fashion. It was a very carefully planned and very efficient operation from their point of view. They must be thinking tonight, wherever they are, that they have succeeded in this first stage of this terrorist war against the United States, but it is far, far from over. The price has been very heavy for the United States in so many ways, and we still do not know the full cost of this terrorist attack today. But the President of the United States tonight pledged to the American people that, in fact, that there would be justice visited upon the terrorists and any nation that may harbor them. And he then also praised the American people as they came together to help heal the wounds of this long and difficult day. Let's go back to NBC's Robert Hager now, who is at the FAA, and talk about where we go from here with the National Transportation Safety Board and the investigations that are already underway. I would guess that one of the first orders of business would be to recover the black boxes, the cockpit voice recording devices, to find out what in fact happened in those cockpits, Robert.
Absolutely. Now, normally the National Transportation Safety Board doesn't get involved in incidents that are obvious acts of terrorism like this, because they investigate the things that more often cause crashes, pilot error and mechanical errors, things like that. So usually they just turn it over to the FBI. But in this case, those black boxes could be crucial, particularly the cockpit voice recorder, because that picks up all the sounds in the cockpit. So we're told that NTSB experts are already on scene now, working very much in cooperation with the FBI in search of those black boxes, particularly the cockpit voice recorders. Now, you know, those boxes are designed to withstand tremendous forces. These were indeed tremendous forces, the way these planes went in. Nothing, sometimes a plane goes in prior to hitting an airport runway and goes in at kind of an angle, and the forces aren't nearly what these are, but smacking right into that Trade Center building like that, or in the case of Pittsburgh, nosing it at a steep angle into the ground, that's a lot to expect of that box, but it may very well be that the cockpit voice recorders have survived that. So now we've been told that NTSB investigators are on site in Pennsylvania and in New York City around the World Trade Center, and right here in their backyard in Washington around the Pentagon, to see if they can find that cockpit voice recorder.
And Robert, I think you were the one who told us earlier today that an air traffic controller in New Hampshire did pick up a fragment of a radio transmission from the first flight, the American Airlines Flight 11 that left Boston.
It's an unconfirmed report, but that report says that the pilot had his microphone keyed, it's called. In other words, he left his thumb down on the microphone so that it was on, and that it picked up the voice of a terrorist in English saying, do this and you won't get hurt, don't expect any trouble, or something like that. And then the microphone went dead. And then the transponders, I think the transponders in all these planes were turned off. So obviously these people knew a lot about what they were doing. And the transponder sends a signal to the radar in the far-off air traffic control centers and tells them what plane a particular blip represents and what altitudes it's at. So without that transponder, the primary transponder, the controllers would have been able to see a blip, but they no longer would have known what altitude the planes were at. So they're watching this blip, they're seeing the plane off course, they have an idea that it's been hijacked, but there's nothing they can do about it.
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager. Well, security officials at Logan Airport in Boston will be getting a thorough shakedown tomorrow, because two of the planes originated from there. Those are the planes that went into the World Trade Center, and apparently the terrorists were able to board those planes with whatever weapons they had. There's one report that some of them may have been armed with knives, but two of the flights did originate in Boston. They were able to divert those California-bound flights, turning left shortly after takeoff and coming directly down to the World Trade Center. One left from Newark. That went into the ground outside of Pittsburgh, and of course the other one left from Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. It was headed for Los Angeles as well. It was turned around. It flew low over the capital city, and then it went like a bullet into the side of the Pentagon about 40 minutes after the original attack on the World Trade Center. We've asked Dateline's Lee Thompson to take us through the current state of airline and airport security and where it may go from here.
For years now, one of the primary focuses of aviation security has been to prevent terrorists from smuggling bombs onto our planes. But what was never fully anticipated was that the planes themselves would become the bombs, guided missiles in the hands of the terrorists.
It was a jet. I couldn't believe my eyes.
The agency charged with spearheading airport security and safeguarding the skies, the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, after the most devastating terrorist attack in U.S. history, the FAA, often criticized for lax enforcement and bureaucratic bungling, is itself under siege.
The FAA has blood on its hands because it's not doing its job and hasn't been.
Michael Boyd is an independent aviation consultant with commercial airlines among his clients.
We have a major security problem, obviously, and the FAA is at the middle of it. We've known this for years. I've said it for years, that to a trained terrorist, our airports look like a laundromat. You can get in and get out.
Along with each commercial airline disaster have come new revelations of serious failures by the FAA. Perhaps none more frightening than the multitude of security lapses.
Asking grandma whether she's packed her own bag isn't security when whole perimeters of airports look like sieves.
1988, Lockerbie, Scotland. A terrorist bomb blows Pan Am Flight 103 out of the sky. The aftermath brought both recriminations and recommendations. Our government assured us airport security would be beefed up. Additional security personnel were hired, metal detectors, X-ray machines, and most recently, bomb detection technology. All were deployed to combat the threat of terrorism. But time and time again, in the 12 years since Lockerbie, gaping holes in security have been exposed. Holes the FAA pledged to fix. Holes that government reports warned still remained. Holes that were likely exploited by these terrorists today. There appears to have been a total breakdown at least 3 airports in this country. Give us the scenario of what might have happened.
Well, there are 2 plausible scenarios. Either someone was able to get through the security side at those airports, or maybe even more likely, people working on the ground crews had been compromised.
How easy is it, and tell us the plain truth, to get a gun or a bomb on an airplane?
There are always some airports that fail when we try to get a gun or a knife on an aircraft.
How easy is it to get a job as a security screener?
It is as easy as falling off the proverbial turnip truck to get a job as a security screener. We have people that would be flipping hamburgers if they weren't working in the security function. They're not very well skilled, there's very high turnover, and I'm not sure that they're up to the job.
But inadequate screening of passengers and baggage is not the only threat to security.
We don't screen the people who work at airports properly. At tests that have been done at airports around the United States, we found a large percentage of, or certainly a large number of illegal immigrants, people whose background that we really couldn't check out.
In fact, as Dateline reported in 1996, our producers applied for and were given jobs at 2 of the biggest airports in the country. At Newark Airport in New Jersey, where one of the hijacked planes departed this morning, our undercover producer was hired on the spot, no questions asked, and no job references checked to drive this electric car. But within 2 days, he was working security, checking carry-on bags. He was given no training. And watch how our undercover producer wanders along tarmacs and throughout airplanes without the ID to be there. And he passes some 10 other airport employees without being stopped. At Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta, our producer was hired as a baggage handler without the required background check. Again, he was free to roam on airliners like this one. After Dateline's broadcast, the FAA did change policy to try to prevent these types of security breaches, but recent government reports indicate problems persist. This year, the General Accounting Office warned security screeners at U.S. airports continue to miss as many as 20% of weapons smuggled in carry-on luggage during FAA-sponsored tests, and that FAA plans to improve hiring, training, and supervision of security screeners, including the companies that provide them, are woefully behind, in some cases up to 2 years. It's too early to say whether the terrorists gained access to the planes today because of poor security checks or someone working on the inside. But this much is clear. The hijackings were well planned, and the terrorists highly trained. Once on board, they knew exactly what to do. Experts say once airborne, there was little the crew could have done to fend off the attackers.
Once on board the aircraft, it would not at all be difficult to gain access to the cockpit. Cockpit door is not like the vault door in a bank, for example. They're rather fragile. You can kick them in if you had to.
Barry Schiff is a retired commercial pilot for a major airline who flew both Boeing 757s and Boeing 767s, the same kinds of jets involved in today's attack.
Pilots go in and out of the cockpit as they need to go to the restrooms. Coffee is brought to them, so the door is opening every once in a while anyway. And even if the cockpit door were locked and nobody were going in or out, it would not be difficult to threaten a flight attendant such that she would get the pilots to open the door because of fear for her life.
Though pilots are trained to handle hijackings, Schiff says historically they don't usually result in fatalities, much less the downing of an airliner.
In most cases, a hijacking is not a dangerous situation. Most hijackings are easily resolved. There's very little a pilot can do if an armed hijacker comes into the cockpit. In most cases, he'll believe that a hijacking is going to end peacefully. In most cases, they normally do. He would have no idea that his aircraft were going to be used as a missile.
Commercial pilots do have the ability to push a button to communicate to air traffic controllers that their plane has been hijacked. But apparently none of the pilots this morning even had a chance to send the signal.
If one had to speculate, I would say the terrorists were flying the aircraft, not the airline pilots who should have been flying the airplane. Mainly because I don't believe any airline pilot would intentionally fly into the World Trade Center, even with a gun at his head.
We may never know exactly what happened in the cockpits, but both the FAA and the airlines had to have known that something was terribly amiss as each of the planes veered inexplicably off their flight paths. What you are looking at is the actual radar tracking of the two flights that left Boston's Logan Airport this morning. American flight number 11, shown here is the blue plane, takes off first. United Flight 175 takes off next. Both proceed west towards Los Angeles. They are fully fueled for a transcontinental trip. Then, somewhere near New York State, the planes abruptly change direction, now flying southeast to Ground Zero, the tip of Manhattan. American Flight 11 finds its target first, Tower number 1. 21 minutes later, American Flight 175, in red, flies south of Manhattan, then makes a sharp turn to the north, where its final chilling moments aloft were captured on videotape. Meanwhile, United Airlines Flight 93 leaves Newark Airport in New Jersey for San Francisco. The radar shows that somewhere near Cleveland, the plane makes a sudden U-turn, then disappears. It crashed in this field near Pittsburgh. Its final destination unknown, but experts suspect that it was likely headed to a target in Washington, D.C.
Since the airplane crashed in a rural area, that there might have been a struggle on board that aircraft between the crew and the hijackers, and that the crew somehow managed to thwart the hijackers' intent of crashing that airplane into something else.
If that's true, the crew probably saved hundreds, maybe thousands of lives on the ground. Unfortunately, even their heroics will not be enough to save the aviation system upon which America relies so heavily.
A linchpin of our economy is our air transportation system. We can't do without it. It's not an accessory. As of today, that linchpin has been shut down. In the coming months, what we're going to find is an air transportation system that's totally different than we've known. It's going to be one where airports are going to be basically armed camps.
Providing safe and secure passage for the 640 million passengers passing through 1,000 screening checkpoints, traveling with more than 2.5 billion pieces of carry-on and checked luggage, flying on 97 air carriers is a monumental task that will likely take years to manage.
That's Dateline's Lee Thompson tonight on the state of airport security in this country and airline security. Some very sharp critics in there. It will get much tougher in the days immediately following this terrorist attack and for months and probably for years to come as well. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, has appeared to give us an update on the toll of casualties in the World Trade Center attack and the collapse of those 110-story skyscrapers, and also 7 World Trade Center, the 40-story building that came down later. Here is some of what he had to say this evening.
At the scene, it's a horrific sight, but there are thousands and thousands of emergency workers down there. We've gotten a tremendous amount of help and assistance. In fact, we actually probably have more equipment than we need at this point. We're very grateful for it, and it'll be stored in areas, and probably over the next 2 or 3 days we will need it. And we'll do everything we can to support the efforts of the people who are trying to recover people from the debris and the horror that's taken place down there. The number to call if you have questions. I'm not sure we can answer all of your questions, but at least we can try to answer it, is 1-212-560-2730. That's 1-212-560-2730. If you have questions throughout the night and tomorrow, that's the number to call, rather than 911, which you should just call if there is an emergency. We had
and nurses on duty, or people that came in from their days off. There was a convention of physicians in town here. As a matter of fact, we had people from Europe come and offer their assistance, and in fact, ultimately, we ended up turning people away because so many wonderful New Yorkers and people from around the world volunteered their services.
And there was also an amazing sight here today. At one point, the hospital had asked for blood, and the number of donors who were spilling onto the street here was so great, within just minutes of the first announcement, that you had to turn them away.
We did. Actually, we had over 800 people in line at one point. The mayor happened to come at that moment and said, "What do you need?" And we said, "We have people we have to ship to other blood centers." And we had 10 city buses here in a matter of moments. Those 800 people were brought around the city to donate blood in other places.
And you have enough beds to handle all the people that have come in and all the people that will be coming in the next hours?
We do. We have 2,600 beds in the St. Vincent's Catholic Medical Center system, 800 beds here in Manhattan. We were able to send many of our patients to our other hospitals, and they will be ready now with beds here in Manhattan in the event we get many more patients overnight.
Thank you very much, and great job here by many, many doctors and nurses, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, Bob Bazell. St. Vincent's one of New York's premier hospitals in Lower Manhattan, not too far from the World Trade Center, or what used to be the World Trade Center. You can only imagine what it was like in the nation's capital today. First, the news that the World Trade Center had been hit by a plane, then a second plane had hit the other tower. That, of course, conjured up immediate visions of that this was some kind of a terrorist attack. Then the Pentagon was hit by a hijacked airliner. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, was in his office at the time. It penetrated 2 of the rings of that fortress-like building. The fires continue to burn there tonight. There was a code red on Capitol Hill. That meant that House Speaker Dennis Hastert, who is third in line of succession, had to be taken to a secure location. Condoleezza Rice, the national security advisor to the president, was on the phone to him. He was at a literacy event in Florida, and she told his staff that they then suspected terrorism as a result of the second attack. She went to the operations room in the White House with Vice President Dick Cheney. Colin Powell turned around on a trip to Lima and started back for the United States. What kind of a day was it for the rest of the day in the nation's capital? Here's NBC's Nora O'Donnell with a report on this day that will be remembered for so long, for so many terrible reasons.
Get all these people across the street, please.
Moments after the attack on New York, the chaos spread to the nation's capital.
So what looked to be maybe a 20-passenger corporate jet, no markings on the side, coming in at a shallow angle like it was landing right into the side of the Pentagon. And then a huge fireball, perhaps 5 times the height of the Pentagon.
The terrorist target was the nerve center of the United States military. An explosion ripped through the building that since World War II has symbolized America's power.
And we heard this boom, the building shook, the ceiling tiles fell out of the ceiling, and we ran out. We kind of dazed, grabbed our hard hats, ran out, and there was just smoke. People were screaming, "Run, what is it, what is it?"
Let's roll! Get on the other side!
firefighters rushed to put out the flames, America learned that the Pentagon had indeed taken a direct hit, not from a corporate jet, but from another hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 77, en route from Washington's Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. 58 passengers and 6 crew members were aboard. There may have been as many as 100 more people killed or injured inside the building. Dozens were rushed to area hospitals, yet to be accounted for, others that may still be left in the smoldering rubble.
Here in Washington, D.C., we are at threat condition Delta.
Washington, D.C., now in the crosshairs of terrorism. The military was ordered to its highest state of alert. And at the White House, the Secret Service received a credible threat of a terrorist act.
You've got to be off the grounds and inside the building.
A fourth hijacked plane that crashed 80 miles outside Pittsburgh is believed to have been headed for an attack on Camp David, the presidential retreat in the mountains of Maryland. The president wasn't in town, but Vice President Cheney was. He and key aides were whisked out of the West Wing and into a secure location, while other White House staffers were evacuated under the watch of Secret Service agents armed with machine guns.
We've had some reports about intrusions of airspace, which caused us to be concerned enough to recess the House of Representatives subject to the call of the chair.
At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue at the U.S. Capitol and Supreme Court, lawmakers and justices were forced from the seat of American democracy.
I think, in a sense, it is unfortunately a unique experience in American history.
And I characterize it as an escort that Air Force One had as it flew back to Washington today from the Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base. That may become a routine procedure for the president as he flies domestically in this country as well as internationally. It's not always a conspicuous presence. You generally have planes when you're flying with the president over disputed areas that are in the vicinity, but you don't see him flying that closely off the wing of Air Force One. They're on their approach now to Andrews Air Force Base. That's an F-16. I think I can only see one tail sticking up, so I think it's an F-16 that helped escort them back to Andrews Air Force Base. Let's go to Dateline's Keith Morrison, as he has been taking the pulse of this country. America, in all of its complexity and all of its parts, becomes a family on a day like today. Here's Dateline's Keith Morrison.
In a moment, everyone knew things can't be the same anymore. And all across the country, as shock gave way to fear or anger or some other emotion, officials in charge of places and events shut them down. Suddenly, this is a country in which security means everything. Airports almost everywhere closed.
No airplanes will be leaving any of the airports in the United States until the ground stop is lifted.
Hundreds of people at airports all around the country crowded around TV sets, stunned.
It's unbelievable to me that people can crash planes in the World Trade Center and collapse on thousands of people. All the rescue workers outside there. It's absolutely devastating.
I don't think anybody in this nation is going to be able to sit down at dinner this evening or any evening from now on and consider ourselves to be completely safe. This is crazy.
The order to close for the first time the entire national air traffic system came early from the Federal Aviation Administration. Many of those airports were evacuated. For how long? Who knows? At least until tomorrow afternoon, perhaps longer. No one's ever done such a thing before, ever.
I think our security is going to be so tight tomorrow that you're not going to believe it. It's going to take a long time to get everybody cleared. I mean, they're going to be doing hand searches. They're going to be doing all kinds of stuff. It's going to be the top level of security that we have tomorrow.
Markets, of course, just stopped. How could they operate here? Already, the financial loss has been in the billions. And, said UCLA finance professor Bradford Cornell, it will hurt for some time.
Investors are likely to get frightened. That will lead to a dramatic drop in stock prices.
And now, says Cornell, now that many institutions and companies will try to be more careful about security, we'll keep paying.
That throws sand into the gears on which our economy runs. And it's going to make the cost of doing business greater, corporate profits lower, and that will depress stock prices and economic activity, even in the long run.
But that's for some other day. Today, nationwide, flags were lowered to half-staff. Many states closed their public buildings, courthouses shuttered, trials postponed, popular landmarks locked up. Seattle's Space Needle, the Disney parks on both coasts, even the U.S. Mint shut down. The national pastime went the way of the national mood. Baseball commissioners announced that the schedule is off indefinitely. And for the Emmys, postponed indefinitely. Who felt like celebrating?
This weekend is not the weekend to put on this telecast.
In Texas, thousands of people flocked to a prayer vigil at Southern Methodist University.
Help us to make sense of senseless acts.
Psychiatrist Dr. Stephen Kingsbury said he expects a lot of people will want to be overcautious for a while.
Our sense that we live in a safe society where we have good protections against external threats has been taken from us.
And a terrorism expert, Peter Chalk, who spoke to us over the phone because security kept him out of downtown Washington, told us overreacting towards safety might be a good idea for a while.
That symbolic message that's been transmitted across the world will have profoundly affected the image of the United States abroad, of invulnerability, and that the U.S. can be brought in to the very front line of this sort of attack.
And what wasn't shut down today, we are much more careful about guarding. The border with Mexico and with Canada closed for a while. Security around military installations like this one is at extraordinary levels, of course, also at atomic plants and the other sensitive places in the American infrastructure, which in the past had seemed impervious. No longer. The terrorism expert worries that in their fear and anger, Americans may decide it's time to end this country's famous openness. That would be a mistake, he says.
Without a doubt, I mean, one of the prices you pay for being in a democratic society is that you have to live with a certain risk threshold. The only way you could realistically counter a lot of these dangers is to have a closed society, but that's not what we're about.
America may be a little different after today, a little more conscious of external threat. As the psychiatrist said, we may have some new routines now.
Does that mean that there'll never be another hijacking or terrorist attack? Probably not. Does it mean the vast majority of us will feel safer? Definitely, eventually.
But not today. Today we interviewed the doctor in a park because security at his university office kept our cameras outside.
That's Dateline's Keith Morrison on the mood of this country on this stunning day that so brought together America in grief and shock, frustration and anger and determination to go forward as well. We do have some additional information for you. A top New York City police official said at the end of the news conference by Mayor Giuliani that, in fact, there are people still alive trapped in the rubble of the World Trade Center. He wouldn't say how many, but they're bringing in heavy construction equipment to move a lot of the big blocks of concrete that have come down and the steel beams as well. And he says that they have recovered some victims who were still alive when they found them this evening. So that's the most heartening news that we've had from the site of this carnage in lower Manhattan so far tonight. The work will go on through the night and for several more days. John Hanson, the assistant fire chief in Oklahoma City, reminded us earlier that in Oklahoma City the rescue efforts were going on for 7 days before they were called to a halt, and they had a full accounting of all the people who were missing. And as horrendous as Oklahoma City was, it will pale in comparison probably in terms of the number of people who were in the World Trade Center when those two buildings came down, say nothing of that 40-story building that came down later, although that area had been evacuated by that time. NBC's Maria Shriver is in our Burbank bureau tonight, and she has been looking at the people who were on those flights that were destined, most of them for Los Angeles, although one flight was headed for San Francisco. Maria, what can you tell us?
Well, Tom, as you have been reporting, as you just mentioned, all 4 of the hijacked planes were headed here to California, 1 to San Francisco, 3 here to Los Angeles. And the news that came here to California when people heard that those flights were coming here brought this city almost 3,000 miles away from the New York World Trade Center to almost a complete standstill. Los Angeles was one of the first airports in the country to get the early morning call to close down.
Los Angeles International is one of the airports that we've asked to be evacuated early on.
That unprecedented move spread fear throughout the city that terrorism might be heading west. The city went into high alert. Federal buildings, City Hall, and the courts were all evacuated, and that was just the beginning. The chief of police attended an emergency council meeting and went on television to try and calm people's fears.
We certainly want to, again, reassure the public that all is safe in the city of LA. We certainly have no guarantees, but we're certainly looking at all of the precautionary measures to ensure that the community is as safe as possible.
And while there were no terrorist incidents, nonetheless, businesses came to a standstill. Disneyland closed its doors not just in California, but throughout the world. Virtually all studios closed down, including Jay Leno, who suspended production for the rest of the week. Tonight's Latin Grammys were also canceled, so was Madonna's concert and sporting events for the near future. Even the Emmys canceled Sunday's awards ceremony.
A celebration and a comedy show would just not be something that would be appropriate for this country this weekend.
By mid-afternoon, the state's governor felt it necessary to go on television and reassure all Californians that their state was indeed secure.
First of all emergency services operations are up and running throughout California. Secondly, all law enforcement and firefighting personnel at the state level are fully deployed.
But despite the pronouncements from elected officials, this was a state in fear and shock.
It's like a movie. I can't believe that it could happen in this country.
And while thousands of Los Angelinos were stranded and frightened, the real concern here was for New Yorkers and for the families here in Los Angeles who had loved ones on those planes. American and United Airlines asked the Salvation Army and the Red Cross to be available today to offer pastoral and ministerial services to the families of victims.
It's just to be there and to say to them, we are here and we'll do whatever we can do to help you through this trauma and this pain.
Tom, it's important to note that neither American Airlines or United Airlines have officially released the names of the passengers on those 4 flights. But however, some family members have released some names, most notably David Angel and his wife Lynn were on the flight from Boston here to Los Angeles. Angel is well known as the producer, one of the producers of the hit television show Frasier. His colleagues released a statement this afternoon calling him an incredibly talented, kind, and gentle man, a man of incredible personal faith as well. He perished on that flight. Also, as we've been reporting, I know you have also Barbara Olson. She was the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson. She was on the flight from Washington to Los Angeles. She was one of the few passengers on several of these flights who managed to make a cell phone call to her husband where she told him that they were being hijacked. Moments later, her plane crashed into the Pentagon. Several other names have trickled out, but we don't know whether their kin have been notified, so we don't want to go out and actually tell you who they are. American Airlines and United have both asked us to publicize 800 numbers that they have put together. This is for family and friends who have questions, who want information about whether loved ones actually did get on those flights. The United hotline is 1-800-932-6555, and the American Airlines hotline is 1-800-245-0999. And they're quick to point out that people who are just who have no real personal connection should not tie up these lines. These are phone numbers for families, for concerned members of families who might have loved ones on those flights. But people here, you can, if you flew over this city today, you wouldn't even recognize it because these normally clogged freeways were virtually empty. Many people kept their children at home from school, although the school system did go on as usual, and people have been asking the city to return to normal. But very much, this was a city very much in shock this morning. Throughout the day, people thought this terrorism might be headed this way. So we'll continue to keep you up to date on the California situation. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Maria Shriver. I suspect that was the case across the country. as well, even for cities and small towns that were not the destination of these airplanes, that things did come to a stop today because it was one of those events in which America coalesces around its sense of national identity and shares the television set as well, trying to keep abreast of what has been going on. We're joined now by New York Governor Pataki, who has been down at the scene of this carnage all day long. Governor, tonight we heard a top New York City police official say that there are still people alive, that they do expect to recover some people from that wreckage throughout the night tonight. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, we certainly hope so. The rescue efforts are ongoing, and they have the highest priority. We have the city of New York has the finest police and fire rescue teams in the world. They've been augmented by our state, National Guard, and federal help, and everything that can be done is being done, and we're just praying that we can recover some people who might be in the rubble right now.
The New York City Firemen's Union reported earlier that it had lost 200 of its members when the buildings came down. Is there any confirmation of that you have independently?
We don't have any confirmation of particular numbers, but we know this is one of the darkest days in American history, and our prayers are with those who have lost their lives, with the brave families of the firefighters and the police who risked their lives to save others and were victimized by this terrorist attack, and our prayers are with those who are afraid their parents might not come home tonight. But we're going to continue to have hope. We're going to continue to work to get through this and to make sure that everything is done to try to recover anyone who might still be alive downtown.
That is the highest priority, obviously, and to treat those who have been injured and to recover those who have been killed. Do you have any sense at all as to when that financial district can return to some semblance of normality?
Tom, as you know, we've closed New York City south of 14th Street for tomorrow. The point right now is to make sure the entire focus is on the rescue and the search efforts, and that the emergency crews can get in and out as easily and as readily as possible. And we'll make a determination tomorrow, probably at the end of the day, what additional parts of the city may be open tomorrow afternoon. But right now, the entire focus has to be on the rescue and search efforts.
You used to have an office in the World Trade Center, didn't
you? I had my office in the World Trade Center, and the state today has had many, many offices and many employees in the World Trade Center, and I had friends there this morning.
And do you know what happened?
We don't know. We don't know. We're praying, and we're doing everything we can to try to rescue them.
Is there anything that the citizens of New York or surrounding areas should know in terms of what the city or what the state needs that they can do?
Tom, the citizens have been great. I was down at Cabrini Hospital a couple of hours ago, and we had lines around the blocks of people in line to donate blood. They're not letting terrorists drive them from the streets, and in fact, they're coming together. We are going to, as this process moves forward, need EMTs, nurses, additional support as the frontline forces downtown now go through this and need relief. And we set up state hotlines for nurses, doctors, EMTs, and others. And we're also organizing additional fire and police support so that we can rotate services in and out. But the spirit has been enormous. This is a very dark day, but out of this death and destruction, you can see hope. And we're not going to let these terrorist barbarians take away our freedom and take away our hope.
Finally, tough question, Governor Pataki, but what are your officials telling you about the population in those buildings when they came down?
We just don't know. We know that a number of people did get out and were evacuated before the buildings came down. At this point, we just don't know how many were not able to get out.
There's an unconfirmed report tonight from a New York radio station, Governor, that 2 men with a truckload of explosives were arrested at or near the George Washington Bridge. Do you know anything about that?
We've had all sorts of reports and rumors, and we've been in constant touch with federal officials, with the FBI and the national security officials, and we have no confirmed report of any such activity at this point. I also spoke with the President and the Vice President earlier today, and they have no information that additional terrorist threats have been targeted at New York or anywhere else at this point. Obviously, no one knew or anticipated the attacks this morning, so we can never be 100% sure. But at this point, I'm unaware of any direct security threats that the federal government is aware of.
Governor George Pataki, the governor of the state of New York, it's been a long and difficult day for you. It will not end at midnight tonight, obviously. We wish you the very best.
Thank you very much, Tom.
All right, Governor Pataki of New York. Barbara Olson, we have a picture of her, I think. She is the well-known CNN conservative commentator. Her husband is Theodore Olson, who is the Solicitor General of the United States, successfully argued on behalf of President George W. Bush before the U.S. Supreme Court in that contested presidential election growing out of Florida. This is a personal loss for the administration as well, because Barbara and Ted Olson were two of the most popular figures, especially in Republican social circles in Washington. They loved to entertain. They loved the opera. They were two people who were well known for their keen wit and their very keen intelligence. And she did get off a phone call to her husband on the cell phone before her plane crashed into the Pentagon today. So there is a personal loss at the White House tonight as well with the death of Barbara Olson. We're going to go now to Ashley Banfield, who is in downtown New York, not too far from the World Trade Center, where she has been throughout the day and had a very perilous experience herself. At one point, Ashley had to break some windows to get in the building to get away from the dust and smoke cloud.
Tom, when the second tower came down, unfortunately, my producer and I found ourselves in a far too close a situation, and we were finding ourselves running from the cloud that consumed us, and we had to break into a nearby building just to breathe, and we were followed by a New York police officer and also a security guard from the World Trade Center. We couldn't recognize either of them because we were all covered in so much white dust at the time. It was barely recognizable except for his badge. I just want to get you up to speed on what's happening now. We've been watching a number of different emergency vehicles filing into this area, but we're also watching as a number of semi-trucks roll in as well. We've been told that about 24 semi-trucks as well as 60 different dump trucks have been lined up and ready to go in to move away some of the large debris. As you're about to hear in a moment, there's a reason why they're having to remove that large debris before they can actually continue this search, because most of the searching on the surface of these two stumps of what were the World Trade Center towers didn't really provide much to anybody. There wasn't much to be found at all, certainly no one alive. And what's strange is very few cadavers as well. I'm joined by one of the firefighters who was one of the first on the scene. Lieutenant Pat Clancy has just come out from 12 hours in sort of the ground zero area, and I just want you to describe for me what happened when you first arrived, Pat, on the scene and you ended up going up onto the rubble heaps.
Myself and the firefighters from my company were ordered to go to, we were at a command post, we were ordered to go to where one of the towers was, I believe it was the Tower 1. There was nothing really there, but 10, maybe 5 or 6 stories of debris, and we slowly climbed over as much as we could and started searching for people that might have been on surface, and trying to crawl into some of the crevices and crawling out, hitting tools, looking for possible firefighters or civilians.
You knew at the time there would be firefighter casualties. Did you have any idea that the number as it stands is about 200 of your colleagues?
We were assuming it would be a large amount, but firefighters, civilians, police officers, emergency workers. They're even a block away. There are fire trucks and police cruisers that are ambulances that are flipped over, burned out a block away.
Just quickly, you were able to call your wife via our cell phones when you got out of your 12-hour shift. She had no idea you were alive. What was her response to you?
She was hysterical, but I would imagine hundreds of firefighters are the same way, their wives.
Lieutenant Pat Clancy, thank you for talking to us, and good luck. Stay safe. I know you're going back in tomorrow, so be careful. Thank you. Tom, that's been the story from a number of the firefighters and emergency workers who've emerged from this, many of them covered in the white dust that you've seen probably throughout all of the pictures today. It's been just a tragic story all around, many of them knowing full well that they've lost a lot of friends, colleagues, and loved ones in that rubble as well.
Actually, because you have been isolated down there in a way you may not have heard, a top New York City official is now saying tonight that, in fact, there are some people who are alive in the rubble, and they do hope to get them out before the end of the night. He also said that they had recovered some people who were still alive when they got them out of the rubble. So there is some faint hope, at least, for people who have been trapped in there. We don't know the number by any means or how severely they are trapped at this time. But thank you very much. It's been a long and difficult and dangerous day for you, and we do appreciate your reporting. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now, who has some additional information for us on that United Airlines flight that left Newark bound for San Francisco and then was headed back toward the East Coast when it went down outside of Pittsburgh. Robert?
A couple of pieces of key information. It comes from a briefing that Attorney General John Ashcroft has just completed for members of Congress at the Capitol Police Headquarters down near the Capitol. First, before that Pennsylvania plane, he did tell the members of Congress that knives were the weapons used in these attacks. We'd had some inklings of that before from cell phone calls made from the planes, but as far as federal authorities know, knives were the weapons used. There are no reports yet of guns having been used in any of these 4 planes that were hijacked. Now, the point about that the fourth of the crashes, it was a United airliner that had taken off from Newark, and on the etching you can see it got out near Cleveland, and suddenly it diverts back east. There had been some speculation that it might have been headed for Camp David, but Attorney General Ashcroft in his briefing for members of Congress said it was turning back for Washington, D.C. He did not say any particular target. In fact, I guess there'd be no way for him to know what target they had in mind, but he did believe that they had Washington in mind as a destination, and there's some indication they might have actually filed some kind of flight plan from the air saying that. He also said one other thing, that plane was not shot down. Now, there'd been no evidence that it was, but there were rumors around earlier in the day. Many people wondered, gee, could they have heard that it was going for the White House or something? Could anyone have actually dared to have ordered it to be shot down, even with all those people on it, because of national security? But Attorney General Ashcroft put an end to that. He said the plane was not shot down from the air, not shot down by any missile. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager. Any additional word, by the way, Bob, on when flights may be resumed?
No, they're still saying noon tomorrow Eastern time is when they're going to consider it, but it's not certain that that's when it will come. At any rate, it's clear that there'll be a lot more security checks, that there's going to be, for openers, no more curbside baggage, and there are going to be scattered checks for identification and personal checks of handbags, that kind of thing. It's going to be time-consuming.
All right, thank you very much. We've just heard a stunning number from the Pentagon. We've been trying all night long to get some fix on the number of casualties there. NBC's Jim Miklashevsky stands by now. Jim?
Tom, the latest figures from Arlington firefighters, who are really in charge of the firefighting and rescue efforts here, an estimated 800 killed inside the Pentagon, many of them still buried in the rubble that you see behind us. They brought in heavy earth movers, cadaver dogs, in an effort to find those who are still buried in the rubble. Very little hope, really, of finding anyone still alive, given the intensity of the fire inside and the severity of the damage to the building, the total collapse of all 5 floors down onto the ground floor. So, again, the latest estimate, 800 dead in the Pentagon. Tom?
We should assume that the majority of those are military personnel, or would it be a mix as well of civilian employees and military personnel?
Given the portion of the building, Tom, it's probably primarily military, Navy, Marines, some Army, and, of course, some civilians mixed in.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky. The very disquieting news that at least 800 people were killed at the Pentagon, more than 266 were killed on those airplanes, an untold number still unaccounted for in Lower Manhattan. This has been, as we have been saying all day long, a day quite unlike any other in American history. There's never been an attack of this severity or this magnitude within the continental United States. People are comparing it to Pearl Harbor, but at that time we did know who the enemy was. It did get the United States involved in World War II. This, of course, a shadowy terrorist attack using civilians against civilians, hijacked airliners as guided missiles. We want to share with you now just some of the first-person accounts of the people who have gone through this long, unending, and difficult day.
On any given day, New York is a city with its own sounds, with its own rhythm. Today, you could feel a collective shudder as it all came crashing down, and the voices of those at Ground Zero are still shaking. Fathers.
All of a sudden, we felt the second one go.
Mothers.
We all heard this just really loud explosion.
Daughters.
A huge explosion and a shudder.
And our own colleagues at NBC.
I never thought that it would happen here.
Tom Lochtefeld, at work at a trading firm on the 80th floor of World Trade Tower 2 when the first plane hit.
All you could see were papers and smoke just flying through and around the plaza. And we looked up about maybe 10 or 15 floors up, and the whole wall was blown out, and it was filled with flames. And everybody was just like in awe. We had no idea what it could be. And suddenly our two managers in the office, they came screaming in with an urgency that I've never, ever heard before in anybody's voice, saying, "Get out, get out, get out, get out." We had gotten down to about the 50th floor from the 80th floor, and there was a PA announcement, and they kept saying, there's a fire in World Trade number 1. The firemen are attending to it. World Trade Center is secure. You may return to your offices. Repeatedly, repeatedly. And everybody just stood in sort of disbelief.
Tom didn't go back. It was far from secure. Just minutes later, the second crash right into his office.
If I went back up, I would have been dead. And if I didn't leave the minute that I left, I would be dead. And God bless the people who were on the 110th floor, because if I was down at the 50th, they were down at the 80th.
It took 15 minutes to get out, but once there,
people had left their shoes to get away. I mean, there were piles of blood in the street of people who had gotten hit by shrapnel from the buildings.
Your wife, you know, she said to me that she thought she was a widow.
I bet.
Kim White was stuck on the 74th floor of Tower 1.
The doors were locked.
Why?
I have no clue. We sat around for about 5, almost 10 minutes trying to find a door or get somebody with a key to come open the doors so we can get downstairs. If we had those precious 5 or 10 minutes, would have made that much of a difference.
A difference because she barely managed to escape as the building was collapsing.
Glass just flying all over the place, and we're not knowing which way to go because we didn't know which way the building fell. Once it hit ground, all you saw was blackness. I'm sitting here saying to myself, breathe properly, Kim, breathe properly, because you don't want to take in too much, because you're going to collapse, and no one's going to be able to find you because there's nothing but blackness.
And breathing wasn't easy, not just because of the debris. To make things worse, Kim suffers from asthma and suffered an attack.
Was there a time today when you thought you were going to die?
Oh, definitely. On at least 3 or 4 occasions. The initial explosion, going out to the reception area, seeing that ceiling collapsed, being stuck in a stairwell and not being able to get in. We couldn't go back up, we couldn't go down. My life didn't flash before my eyes. It was just trying to get down far enough where, you know, I would be safe.
And to the safest place and person.
I just want to see my mother, that's all. I'm probably 32 years old, sleep with my mom tonight.
Someone else's mother, Maggie Cusack, was also battling her way down from the 82nd floor of Tower 1.
The building just shook, and you could see the stuff kind of flying down. You know, it was big. I mean, you could tell it was a large event. I believe all of my coworkers got at least out into the stairwells. I guess it was about the 27th floor. The firemen started coming up into the building. And I just felt that they were very brave, and you know, we were kind of clapping for them and wishing them luck on their way in.
Are you thinking of the firemen because you fear that they were perhaps trapped in the building when it collapsed?
I think they probably were. I think there were a lot of them that did get trapped in there, and I think that's very sad. They were all nice, young, healthy, good-looking guys, and I'm just really grateful that I got out before the buildings collapsed.
A few moments ago,
NBC's Dawn Fratangelo with some of the people who went through the most terrifying day of their lives, their relief that they survived, their gratitude for the people who tried to save them, and their grief as well for their loss. Let's go to NBC's Rahema Ellis now. There is some, I'm told, exceptional videotape at Ground Zero. Rahema?
Tom, indeed, I have just come back from Ground Zero. It's like going inside a disaster. We have some pictures we want you to take a look at. There's an eerie light that's cast over the entire area. Fire crews are hosing down the smoldering remains. There are firefighters everywhere. They are literally sifting through the rubble, trying to see what there is, who they might be able to find. I asked one firefighter, it is hard to imagine that anyone could survive this kind of devastation. But one firefighter said to me, we never give up. We will continue to search through this area until the very last word is given that we shouldn't search anymore. They are hoping against all hope that they can find someone out of this rubble. Tom, it is almost unbelievable. It takes your breath away to stand in what was the center of America's financial area, and now it doesn't exist anymore. There is still dust, choking dust. The air is so thick, it's very hard to breathe. It's very difficult to see. The firefighters, however, as I say, they refuse to give up. We went 1 block away from Ground Zero. It is the staging area where all the firefighters are. We talked with one of the chiefs who told us that he felt that they were able to bring someone out alive. He couldn't tell me what the condition of the person was at this moment, but he said that's what his firefighters are there to do, to see if anybody has been able to survive this tragedy. Tom?
Rahima, did you see any evidence of people who were alive or hear from the firefighters around the ground about recovering some people who were alive?
No, Tom, I did not. Every firefighter I talked to only shook his head, lowered his head in disbelief and sadness, but again, with the determination that they were going to continue to search until all hope was lost of finding anybody alive. They are continuing that search.
Thank you very much. NBC's Rahima Ellis, the New York City police official who said earlier that he believed that people were still alive there. The hope may have been the father of the wish in that case. This day, you'll remember forever, whatever your age, wherever you live in this country. There are those days that, for the people who are alive in America, are etched forever in their minds. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. 1945, the end of World War II, victory over Germany and Japan, the death of FDR. November 22nd, 1963, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The age of innocence came to an end in America. 1968, the assassination of his brother and Martin Luther King. 1974, the resignation of Richard Nixon. 1989, the death of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the liberation of Poland and Czechoslovakia. 1990, the release of Nelson Mandela. And, of course, 1989 as well, Tiananmen Square and all that that meant to this country. 1968 also saw the landing of the man on the moon. And then the millennium, a new century, a new beginning of 1,000 years, new hope for this world and for America. 1 year in, on the 11th of September, the 9th month, 9/11/01, an act of terrorism that is tantamount to war, the most serious attack on this country since Pearl Harbor, the most devastating attack within the continental United States ever by a foreign force of some kind in more than 100 years. We'll all be tested by all of this, and we'll have continuing coverage. Many of your local stations will go to their local news now, but we'll have continuing coverage on this NBC station. Brian Williams will be here for a while, and I'll see you again at 11:30.
You've seen the pictures on television all night.
All part of the way we try to understand a tragedy that has changed lives forever. Coming up in a special report, a doctor from Huntington who fights for better health care is dead tonight after a fateful trip on a hijacked plane.
The power of prayer can't halt the tears and the fear. We'll look how people are pulling together.
And how some tonight are panicking as rumors spread that service stations are raising prices and rationing gas.
All this in the aftermath of the worst terrorist attack in our nation's history. Good evening, I'm Samantha Cozy in Charleston.
And I'm Tim here in Huntington. We begin tonight, Sam, with a brilliant young life cut short. Keith Morehouse has dropped sports for the night to tell us about the death of Dr. Paul Ambrose. A lot of folks knew him around here.
Yeah, Tim, Sam, on a day like this, you really understand how insignificant the games that we play really are. You know, the death toll experts say could reach thousands, but it really starts to sink in when you put a name with a face. In the midst of the chaos came the realization that this tragedy hit way too close to home.
Wholly unexpected. and devastating attacks on the Pentagon and on the Twin Trade Towers.
The fallout reigned over every city and town in this country.
Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured.
Americans hanging on to the president's every word, wondering how could this happen?
And,
Pat Brown is still asking the question. He learned on television that one of his prized med school students, Dr. Paul Ambrose, a Huntington native and a 1995 graduate of the Marshall Med School, died on one of those 4 hijacked airplanes.
I really, truly think that he had the potential to have a tremendous impact on American medicine.
Like the School of Medicine from which he graduated, Ambrose was a champion of rural health. In April of 1999, he visited Huntington with then Surgeon General C. Everett Koop.
We have too many physicians in the country, but they're not distributed correctly. How do we get physicians into areas of need in rural America? And once we get them there, how do they become effective physicians?
I certainly don't want to allow that for which he stood to go unnoticed or unappreciated by those who are following him.
I feel sorry for the victims' families.
Nick Lemley doesn't make a habit of reading the newspaper. What 10-year-old does? But Nick was nervous on this day. His brother Jason is in the Navy, and Jason's wife Kathleen works at the Pentagon. Thankfully, he finds out both Jason and Kathleen are just fine, even if the world he lives in is far from it.
It means that there are some weird people out there that want to do stuff to us because maybe we're stronger or something, I don't know.
You know, my 10-year-old son came home from school and he called me and he really wanted to talk about this, and I know you had a similar experience too.
Yep, yeah, my daughter said, she said, Dad, I'm worried, and you know, what can you say?
Yeah, it made you want to hug your kids extra hard today.
Definitely.
Tough.
Thanks, Keith.
The effects from the attacks today will certainly be far-reaching. Some analysts predict gasoline prices will quickly rise following today's events. We have received numerous calls from people saying prices are going up to $4 and $5 a gallon. But this is what we found. Of the stations we talk with in the Kanawha Valley and really throughout the entire region, the prices are around $1.50 for a regular gallon of gasoline. But analysts say people panicking could send prices higher, and that panic is also causing stations to actually run out of gas. We have just confirmed 2 stations in Huntington are in fact out of gas. They did not expect this run on the gasoline. Tonight, News Channel 3's Raquel Dixon found many people who waited in very long lines to get gas. Cars are lining up to fill their tanks, extra containers, and even 55-gallon drums.
Well, I got a half tank in my car and a half tank in my wife's car, so I go fill those 2 up.
It's clear people are worried that the gas supply won't meet the demand.
In case it gets to where you can't get any, then I'll have some to where I can get to work.
And some customers say nearby stations are already out of gas.
Because they'll probably be out. I done went by 2 or 3 gas stations, and they was out of gas, and I figured I might as well just get my part while I'm doing it, you know.
Rumors are fueling concern among residents.
They're supposed to be shutting down the oil refineries due to the explosion, because due to bomb threats or whatever.
By 12 o'clock tonight, it's supposed to be up to $5 a gallon by tomorrow, from numerous rumors.
And right now it looks like those are simply rumors, because officials assure us there is no shortage of fuel. Now we're here at a gas station and you can still see the cars lined up. There was a line earlier, and now they're filling up. They've all been asking me how much are these gas prices going to rise, and all we can really tell them and our viewers is that we have no reports of any increase in gas prices nor of any shortage. In fact, I spoke with the owner of a gas station in Williamson. He told me he spoke to the refinery earlier and that it's planning to stop at his station as normal and refill their gas. He's only worried that if people continue to panic like they are back here and they fill up more than they really need, then he might run out of gas. Sam? All right, Raquel, we should point out again that we have confirmed tonight that 2 stations in Huntington have in fact run out of gas. Again, though, analysts say reports of an increase in fuel prices of more than $3 and $4 a gallon are creating a false sense of panic, and they advise people to remain calm. And the AAA says people should probably stay away from the pumps for a day or 2. The explosion that rocked the Pentagon sent shudders through Washington, D.C. Senator Jay Rockefeller is in Washington tonight and joins us on the phone. Senator Rockefeller, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Can you describe what you saw and heard today in Washington earlier?
I was at a Democratic leadership meeting, regular Tuesday morning meeting at 9 o'clock, and all of a sudden, I happened to be talking at the time, in fact, and all of a sudden, an enormous plume of debris and smoke arose right virtually outside our window, and it was the Pentagon. We knew immediately that there was, very large trouble, and so we evacuated the Capitol for the first time in the United States history at the order of the Capitol Police. As I was leaving, I picked up a couple senators, just because I had a car, and the couple of the Capitol policemen said there may be a plane headed towards the Capitol. And it didn't turn out to be true, but that sort of describes the atmosphere, even at the Capitol, which was not struck, much less the Pentagon, which was struck, much less New York City. I will say that I strongly agree with the conversation that was held just before I came on, and that is that across America, what we have found today, and I've had 3 or 4 meetings and just came back from one with the Attorney General, FBI Director of the FBI on all of this, that panic and the lack of calm or panic buying is not going to be helpful to the American people at a time when I do not think that you're going to see a great deal more damage. Nobody knows that for sure. But the way to drive up gas prices is to panic buy. The way to keep them down is to not do it.
Now, Senator Rockefeller, President Bush addressed the nation tonight, as you know. He said not only the people who carried out the attack, but those protecting them will be brought to justice. What are your thoughts about that? Many people around our area across the country want real action to be taken.
Yeah, and that's, number one, I completely agree with what he said, that not only those who perpetrated, actually those who perpetrated are for the most part dead, the pilots, the suicide pilots, but anybody who participated in the planning of it or the harboring or sheltering or aiding or abetting of those who planned it or did it, they have to be treated the same way as on a wartime basis the pilots were. That has to be strict retribution. We have had a tendency in the past to let things slip a little bit. We cannot this time. We're entering into a new era. In terms of national security, it's going to be tough to adjust to, but we can do it because we're 282 million people strong. And I'll tell you, this day in Washington, I've never seen, in 17 years, the two parties, all of government, in a sense, all of America, come together in prayer and common purpose, as has happened in one day.
Senator Rockefeller, thank you very much for your time and certainly your insight. Senator Jay Rockefeller, live in Washington, D.C.
Well, the senator mentioned that thousands of people throughout our region were drawn to churches this evening. For many, the grief was profound and the prayers were simple but strong. News Channel 3's Randy Yohe takes us to services in both the city and the rural areas where people gathered to find comfort in God and one another.
We feel overwhelmed.
That feeling of being overwhelmed sent faithful followers and nervous newcomers alike to places like Charleston's Christ Church United Methodist and Boyd Memorial Christian Church. Services where people tried to see the light break through this dark day.
As the teaching of our faith tells us that we are a part of one body. If one part of the body aches, the rest of the part comes to rescue, to sympathize.
And let me tell you, by the grace of God, that we as Americans are awakened tonight.
That awakening inspired about 300 people from a dozen or more Martin County, Kentucky congregations to gather at the local high school football field. They gathered to pray for themselves, for America, and for the dead and injured victims far away in big cities.
We've always felt so secure here, I think, and when something of this multitude has happened to us, that it's the most devastating thing.
Let's put the devil to run, and let's say in the name of Jesus.
There was more anguish than anger at this service, and for now, little of the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth emotions against foreign terrorists.
I don't think that they will jump into anything
as eye for eye, but I believe they will find the right one, and he will be punished.
Martin County's had its own share of tough times lately. Political infighting, sensational drug and crime problems. But many here say those are all trivialized, at least for tonight, by what happened today with the attack on America.
Just as those things that have happened with Martin County, we've always trusted in God, and that's what we're here tonight for, is to put our trust in God.
Many people at this rural mountain gathering are just starting to realize the complications this attack poses for America's future. But many also believe the answers come in a simple but firm faith in God. Randy Yohe, WSAZ News Channel 3.
The plea for the faithful to donate blood also went out at churches and prayer services throughout our region tonight. The snowballing fear of many Americans is that this act of terrorism could indeed mean war. Some say cold-blooded efficiency that had the World Trade Center crumble and killed thousands of people is something that cannot be ignored. The families of many service personnel say now they just wait in fear.
I just got out of the reserves in November. So, you know, I've got 2 kids and I'm pregnant with another one. I'm scared to death that I want to be called out, you know, if Bush does decide that it's time for war.
I wanted to know, I said, are you still able to stay home, or would you have to go if this did turn into a war? And you just don't know. And that is very scary.
Some members of Congress are calling this America's darkest hour. Earlier today, Republican Senator John McCain said the attacks were acts of war, and one senator is calling today's attack the second Pearl Harbor.
Several events have been canceled due to today's events. Ohio University has scheduled game Thursday night with North Carolina State now in Raleigh. That has been rescheduled for Saturday, November 24th at 1 in the afternoon. School is closed tomorrow at St. Joe in Huntington and the Catlettsburg Christian Academy, as well as Gallipolis City and Gallia Local. Ohio Valley Christian School in Gallipolis will also be closed tomorrow. All Kanawha County schools are open as scheduled right now. Much more to come. We have a special look back at the day in pictures.
And reaction from here at home and, of course, around the world.
And as we go to break, a look at some of the emails we've been getting to WSAZ.com.
Sam, Betsy Plott says, I was a very small child when Pearl Harbor was attacked. I can remember being somewhat puzzled about the shocked and horrified reaction of my parents. Well, today I am revisiting that event, and I feel the same way they did.
And Neil Kidd writes, I would like to ask everyone to just say a small prayer for the people and their families who were affected by this attack. Just a small word from each of us can create miracles with God's loving hand.
Hello, I'm Melanie Schaefer. In this national time of crisis, there are 2 ways that you can help. For cash donations, please call the American Red Cross National Disaster Relief Fund at 1-800-HELP-NOW, or you can send a check to the local American Red Cross chapter. There's also a tremendous need for blood. Donations can be given at the following locations, or you can call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE for more information. Thank you for caring.
Even though we are far from the targets of today's attacks, our region is certainly feeling the effects.
Here locally, government offices also closed today, businesses shut down, and schools dismissed early. And as you can imagine, throughout all of this, people expressed shock and outrage. Shortly after the attacks, the 13 chemical plants here in the Kanawha Valley were put on heightened alert. After years of practicing for an emergency, they put those plans in place.
We've increased security here at the site, and we've secured the operations in the facility. And I really don't want to elaborate on what those steps are.
Aventis was not alone. Other companies did the same. Federal buildings were also evacuated. Employees quickly filed out of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers building in Huntington.
Spent 30 years with government. Have not seen anything like this, and it's devastating.
It's scary. This is an awful event, and who knows what might happen the rest of the day. So we're taking the safe precaution and going home.
Lawmakers in Charleston for the special session sent home. We spoke with Governor Bob Wise live on our 6 o'clock newscast.
That we have beefed up security. We have swept many of the buildings. We will have increased state police presence.
County and city governments also shut down for the day. Even shopping malls around the region closed.
No one's safe, and I think they proved that today.
Alarming, I think is the best word to put it.
I can't really, be scared. Just keep on living like anybody else.
Some schools around the region let out early. Some parents picked up their children, while some teachers tried to use this as a real-life history lesson.
It's history, going on right now. It's amazing. Stuff like this, we're so young and we're teenagers, we never get to see this. We only get to read about it in books. And this is something that'll be remembered for so long.
Through all of this, the human spirit never faltered. In communities everywhere, people lined up to help, to donate blood for the thousands of people injured in the attacks.
It's a small part of what you can do to help.
Just to help the people in New York, just to do whatever I can for my country, especially in this time.
There has been no serious threat made to West Virginia, and the Capitol will be open tomorrow here in Charleston. But again, Governor Wise says the state is stepping up security, and in the coming days, weeks, even months, will implement even more measures to ensure our safety.
Sam, people from here in our region are on their way to New York tonight. Volunteers from the American Red Cross in Charleston and in Morgantown are taking vehicles filled with emergency supplies. Now, mainly they will be providing support for rescue workers who are already on the scene, but they say they are prepared to help out in the recovery efforts as well. So far, no terrorist organization or country has come forward claiming responsibility for the attacks in D.C. and New York. You might have seen video of Palestinians celebrating in the streets of the Middle East. Tonight, News Channel 3's Dave Benton talks to international students and U.S. citizens who have roots in the Middle East about today's attack.
We condemn these acts.
Dr. Majed Qadar is a Marshall University professor. He's from the Middle East, but is now an American citizen. He hopes people don't jump to conclusions about the nationality of terrorists who struck America. But signs that say boycott Arab businesses are seen on telephone poles in Huntington.
What we see over on TV and these broadcast messages about the Middle East do not reflect our opinion over here in the local community. I was really shocked when I saw the story, and I feel so sorry. It's hitting me. It's like part of my body just got affected when I hear this story.
Like the rest of us, international students visiting our country are shocked.
I couldn't believe it in the 21st century.
Yuji Shibata is from Japan, but studies at Marshall University this semester.
I emailed my parents that I'm fine.
Other international students say it's a scary situation to be so far from home when terrorists attack.
Yes, a little, because Pittsburgh is not too far.
Both international and American students attended prayer vigils on Marshall's campus, praying for peace. Dave Benton, WSAZ News Channel 3, Huntington.
Dr. Qadar also says the local Arabic and Islamic communities are fully behind our government in taking all necessary measures to punish whoever is responsible for the attacks.
President Bush addressed the nation about 2.5 hours ago. His message, America prevails. He said the attacks were meant to frighten this nation into retreat, but they failed.
Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
Around the world, people mourn the tragedy. Here is a look at reaction from officials at home and abroad.
There is no question but that the attack against the United States of America today was a vicious, well-coordinated, a massive attack against the United States of America.
In this most difficult hour, all Israelis stand as one with the American people. Our hearts are with you, and we are ready to provide any assistance at any time.
This is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history.
Our hearts and our prayers go out to the victims of this act of terrorism, and that our support goes to the rescue workers, and all of our prayers are with everyone there right now.
Our local representatives are also speaking out on this tragedy, Tim.
Sam, they faxed us statements, in fact, in the News Channel 3 newsroom. Ohio Governor Bob Taft says our prayers and thoughts are with those suffering the most personal losses, and our state stands ready to assist in any way possible.
Congressman Ted Strickland says throughout our history, our country has been tested. Once again, it is time for America to stand tall and show the world what we're made of.
And Bernard Schmidt, the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston, says we are called upon to respond to acts of violence and terror by turning to God, the God of mercy and wisdom, for guidance and consolation.
It must have been an unbelievable sight. We've seen it on video, but imagine being right there when a plane smashes into the World Trade Center tower. Eyewitnesses tell us what it was like.
We ran and fell under the thing, and then we came back and we were walking around the other side, and the other building blew, and I pulled a woman underneath a truck because all the debris was falling down then, and now they both collapsed. There's no more World Trade Centers.
Sit at my desk, we heard a loud boom, and then we said, what was that? And I ran out to the window, and I look out and I see smoke. The next thing I saw, I mean, you got to look at it, the bottom elevator, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Oh, that's just when apparently the Trade Center buildings actually collapsed, was what that man was talking about. And then we actually witnessed it with him. Now, many of us have been glued to the television all day and night.
Sam, even those who normally don't have time to tune in were just transfixed by the images flying across the screen. Tonight, we bring you some of those images that will undoubtedly remain with us for years to come.